So thank you for joining another Food Forests. We are entering summer season, which, as we explored before, do not necessarily subscribe to particular seasons, but more the cycles of the biosphere. And we are in biome number 5. And the overall theme of this biome is bodily ecologies, or the ecologies of the body, of bodies. And as usual, the idea here is not a top-down kind of bestowing of knowledge on you, but rather creating a conversation. So I'm going to take maybe 20 minutes, something like that, maybe 30, to share some of the ideas that I've gathered and accumulated over time around the topic. And then we can open the discussion. People who are watching it live, we can have the discussion here. People who are watching it later can continue the discussion on Discord. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also join the Emergent Wisdom Collective on Discord and join the conversation or join us live. What we're doing here is a year-long kind of journey that is probably going to extend beyond that, by which we come together as a community to explore and develop strategies for navigating the polycrisis, navigating the human experience of living through a multiplicity of collapse events, what kind of meanings we want to make, what kind of new stories we want to tell, and what do we actually do to live and thrive in that time. And that is what we're doing. That is what we came here to do. Ultimately, we understand that problems that we have created as a relational process cannot be solved by a special someone, by one savior. Like we need to come together to address those things. And so that's the idea behind all of this. So, bodily ecologies, the overall kind of argument I would like to make, or rather a kind of methodology that I would like to start elaborating, is how we experience our own bodies, or the kind of conception that we have on what a body is, or what the, even beyond the physical body, but the sense of self, and how are they influenced by the very systems of power that we are opposing, that we are consistently talking about here. And more importantly, how these concepts of individual bodies are bumping against the kind of emancipatory free flow of desire, of creative force, and what kind of new possibilities of being, of becoming, of relating with each other as human beings are available to us. And so the ultimate kind of illusion that we want to touch is the illusion of identity, the illusion of a kind of solid sense of identity. And I think for the majority of human history, identity was not something that is socially constructed as much as it was something that emerged in kind of social codes that were from the earth. Like you are where you were born, part of a clan, part of a family, part of certain affiliations. It was something that was inscribed on your actual body through tattoos, rituals, rites of passage. Identity now, much like a lot of other things, came to mean something entirely different, something a lot more ambiguous and amorphous and morphing. And on one hand, this is liberating, a lot more possibilities, a lot more options. But on the other hand, it also led us to a place in which identity is seen as something that is kind of standing between us and potential, true, imaginative potential. And we can see it all around, right? Like we experience ourselves as solid centers, where in actuality, when you think about the human body, the human psyche, we are nothing but a process. This kind of sense that I am this individual thing is basically a collection of past memories and experiences that I'm holding on to for dear life. If you really observe and deconstruct this sense, it's just a process, right? Like this body is an amalgamation of a lot of other bodies that are an amalgamation of a lot of other bodies and processes. More than 70% of this body is not even human DNA. It's bacteria that I've accumulated over time by eating food and traveling to places and eating in different places and drinking different waters, right? And that bacteria sits in my gut and around my body and influence how I feel, what I think, what I do. And so the same way you can think about the sense of self that is created in the prefrontal cortex, these I-based thoughts that ultimately are all parts of processes, social, political, economic, familial, genetic, ancestral processes. And so there is something to be said about how what happens practically when we start seeing a body beyond individual ownership, just like when we have explored how to look at things at Earth beyond individual ownership, beyond ownership as a whole. What does it look like looking at a body beyond individual ownership? Are your feelings yours and yours alone? Is your sexuality something that is individually created, or is it rather a process that is already at play that just actualizes in your body? And what does all of this mean in practice on how we relate, how we imagine human possibilities and social horizons, how we, even on a more personal, interpersonal level, how do we tend to our own feelings and experiences? How do we approach intimacy, sexuality, relationality? And so there's like a few kind of practices or a few kind of conclusions or effects that come from starting to see and explore this body beyond individual ownership, this bodily ecology that is more rooted and grounded in the biosphere, in the multiplicity of looking at bodies and as populations rather than individuals. And I want to share some of them that kind of came to mind as I was thinking about it and contemplating it and researching it. And then we can open it to conversation. And of course, this will continue being a conversation like our bodies. This is also just work in progress here. So the first thing that kind of came to mind when I was starting to think about it is how feelings, emotions, and sensory experience become something that is also a population, also a multiplicity, also a process of becoming. And so I think part of the kind of logics of the capitalist social machine that we live in is that bodies, like commodities, like all of these other flows of production, are this something to infinitely optimize. And that kind of trickled down to therapy and how we do therapy as well. It's kind of this thing of like always in a process of healing, always in a process of optimizing the self, right? Um, Infinitely optimizing the self and keeps on trying to heal, being on this kind of constant sense of optimization. And so is our feelings, right? Like we come with the same kind of sense of how we tend to the sensory experience that happens in our bodies. But what happens if we look at all sensory experience as kind of a pure flow of life force that permeates the whole of existence that happen to actualize in a body in a particular moment, right? Like, what if a sense of sexual desire, for example, is something that permeates the entire biosphere, but when you feel horny in a particular moment, it just happens to actualize in your body in this particular moment? What happens if you what if we look the same way on grief and sadness or anger or rage or any kind of much more nuance or kind of subtle emotional sensory experience. You know, in my work around sexuality with people, we always explore this notion that sexuality as a pre-personal flow of desire that exists in all of the biosphere emulsified into being concentrated in genitals and genital action as a thing that is specifically attached to gender, to particular formation of genitals, or particular, or how sex is supposed to be or supposed to look like, um, as part of the social processes, part of the social conditionings that we are part of. But ultimately, sexuality, your entire body is a whole one big erogenous zone, right? And it's something that I see happening with people that I work with, this kind of sense of expanded desire, expanded erotic aliveness that starts dissolving its attachment to genitals and becomes something that is all around the body. And you think about the same way on any other feeling. You think about feelings as flow of pure energy. And energy here is in kind of like a very specific term to describe the power to do work. Energy as it flows in the entire biosphere, the thing that makes things move forward, attach into each other, create new forms of life, play, and so on and so forth, right? So, how do we attend to feelings that we feel in response to living right now, being a human and existing in a polycrisis? If we look at feelings in this way. Another thing that I was thinking about in relation to going beyond the sense of body as an individual ownership is this kind of immediate dissolution of the body-mind dichotomy that kind of traverse modernity. You have on one hand this kind of direction of transcending the body, whether it's through Judeo-Christian values, transcending the body, transcending material life to some other place, to some other thing, or in a more kind of Western enlightenment, and the transcending of the kind of bestial body with the, mind over matter, mind over body, this kind of sense. And on the other hand, you have a kind of counter movement to that, which is coming back to the body, this kind of somatic, embodied. And I think there is something here that kind of dissolved the two into a complete meaningless dichotomy. It's this one of the same thing. There is nothing outside of and other than bodies. It's just bodies penetrating and co-penetrating bodies. That's it. That's the whole thing. And so when we dissolve that kind of mind-body problem, new capacities are starting to become available, such as intuition. Intuition not as something that is opposed to critical thinking, to thought, to contemplation, but rather the kind of amalgamation of all of these feeling, sensing, thinking capacities at one. And how does that look like in how we move, in how we relate, in how we approach living through a polycrisis? And of course, we can open brackets here and expand infinitely on what does it look like, intuition in this time when we, as a result of, and it's something that I've had conversations with and written about a lot recently, this kind of weird place where we're in, that through our engagement with technology, specifically the internet, we've created this weird feedback loop in which meanings, anything can mean anything and nothing can mean nothing. Symbols are just shared across completely different spaces of meaning, and really nothing can mean nothing. And you can see it all around. Like there is this the whole conversation around if the recent videos of Trump are AI, deepfake, or real, or something like that. And I think the conversation in it of itself exemplifies what I'm saying here, because does it really matter? I think that we became the AI in the way that we engage online. Um, the internet used to be this place that people come to create, to be whimsical, to enjoy, to have a place for creative expression. And now it's this kind of cesspool of advertisement and commercialization, and like everybody are trying to farm engagement. And there is a kind of collective breakdown of things that we came to understand collectively that symbolize something. Like a tiny example of that is how the recent public execution of Charlie Kirk, and how that was done by someone who thought that he's not extreme enough, by another far right person who thought that he's not extreme enough, and considered him as a leftist, by the way in which like neoliberal progressives consider themselves as progressives and leftists, even though like all of these kind of systems of meaning, things that we have came to collectively agree that they mean something, become completely meaningless. Anybody can say anything. A person who is a rapist, pedophile, known sexual offender can become the president of the United States. People can say things and then say, "No, I didn't really say that," or say overtly racist things but maintain that they are not racist. Like nothing means nothing, and anything can mean anything. And I think in that time, developing this kind of um, new relationship to bodily capacity for thinking, feeling, this kind of intuition that takes together all of these contemplative, sensual capacities, is incredibly important. And of course, we can have a conversation about what exactly that means, but I just want to open these kind of tabs and, you know, invite it. Um, okay. Something that I also wrote an essay and published yesterday is conception of temporalities and how they are related to this. And so, in a time that, in a moment that time feels to be accelerated rapidly, we, on one hand, scroll away and in 1 hour feel the range of emotions that our ancestors felt maybe in their entire lifetime. And together with that, there is this kind of sense that every day something monumental and earth-shattering and life-changing happens. Things that just a few years ago, just a few decades ago, just before the pandemic, let's say, would kind of stop everything on its track and become the main conversation for so long. Now it's kind of like 2 days headlines and we are moving on. There's a sense that time is accelerating. And I think sometimes a lot of us, and rightfully so, we think that kind of the countering that and subverting that is decelerating time. So taking life more slow, not orienting towards optimization and profit and productivity, all of these kind of things, which of course require a certain level of privilege to be able to even do. But I think there is something even deeper that is being asked here, which is really reimagining our conception of time itself. What are times that are not linear, that are not chronological, futures that already exist here, just like things like metamorphosis or death or transformation that are already alive in everything that is living. So I think that's also is part of it. Um, of course, another thing that comes is wellness beyond consumption, ecologies of care. So how do we think about care as an ecological thing, which is inherently personal, interpersonal, social, collective, environmental, like all of these things together. There is no wellness or therapy or kind of any kind of attempt at healing that cannot take all of these into account. And this is what happens when we think at bodies not as individual ownership, but rather as populations, as multiplicities. Another thing that is came from me when I was thinking about bodies beyond individual ownership is um, a connection to the range of potential of ecstasy in the body. If we think about the range of what a body can experience, we go from somewhere in the apathy and depression kind of range to all the way to something that the Hindus call samadhi, which is like such bliss that your soul almost leaves the body. And we always live somewhere on that spectrum. And I think opening to those capacities allows us to explore other ways of being in a body, feeling in a body, levels of vibrancy and ecstasy and bliss that are available to us, even and especially within the trials and hardships of our time. Another thing that I was thinking about is creativity as a rewilding mood. So learning to think and move in the biosphere. So we can, it's like a whole praxis of observing the biosphere as a kind of library of wisdom. Like you actually, not as a poet, like, oh, look at the mountains and what can they teach you, but like an actual thing. Like, what can you learn from the biosphere, from observing life around you, what you emerged from, as how informing you how to live, love, die, create, right? So like observing and moving. Deleuze and Guattari call this thing becoming animal, which is quite different than imitating an animal, but actually becoming animal. So these particular attributes and modes that you can recognize in nature become part of you. Like you become tree, you become sky, you become mountain, you become cloud, and all of these attributes and modes and how they play out in your body, in how you move. And of course, each one of these things can be expanded forever, and we're probably going to do it, but just kind of things that come up for me. And then ultimately, and here I will close and we open the conversation, is thinking about the voice as this pre-personal form of embodied expression that is pre-linguistic. And so if we look at language as not the written word, the spoken word, as these kind of social machines that slowly and gradually created the sense of self, the sense of separated self, this whole notion of fragmentation that we have towards reality, then the voice is that which came before that. It's this primordial voice, this sound, this vibrancy that exists in all, that expresses in sound. You can think about maybe earlier humans and how their sound was more resembling a sound of an animal or the sound of the wind, and how they could listen to the wind rustling among the leaves and really get information from that about weather, about the crops, about the cycles, about all of these kind of things. And also our voice and how we express that voice in the world as both as an embodied way of co-regulation, but also as an expression of all the everything and everyone who came before us. This time transcending force of aliveness that exists in us, and how it's being carried, and how we are utilizing and using it, and what is being produced by our voices. That's the kind of going through pretty quickly through the things that come up for me when thinking about return to bodily wisdom and looking at bodies beyond individual ownership as kind of ecological bodies, as rhizomes. And I would love to, have a little conversation about it. I will stop the recording here so we can keep everybody's privacy. Of course, if you're watching the recording, if you're not in Discord, join us. If you are already in Discord, then there is a chat specifically dedicated to conversations about the topics we are exploring here in the Food Forests. So you can head up there and join the conversation.